Yeah,
You
whoops.
can no problem. We'll keep going, recorded or not. That's cool. So this is a project where she works with local community organizations to design and deploy a low-cost network of air quality sensors that provides real-time information about air hazards and air pollution to communities that are disproportionately exposed to fossil fuel pollution. And so the idea is to bring a data-based framework to policymakers in City Hall and across the state and at the EPA to drive policymaking that reduces those harms through removal of fossil fuel sources, buses, local plants and things like that that could be outsized or oftentimes located in these kinds of communities. So this is one example of the kind of impactful work that's going on locally. Another example is a newly awarded grant from the National Science Foundation called the New England Coastal Climate Resilience Hub. And this is a project that's squarely focused on sea level rise. And the thing that it leverages is a network of smart sea level sensors or water level sensors that will be distributed not just around the coast to the bay and things, but also inland, because we have inland flooding and extreme rainfall that communities are facing as well. And so this is something that partners deeply with environmental justice communities and environmental justice zones as kind of the first line of partnerships for this project, to think about what does resilience mean to them, what could it mean to them, and what should it look like? What are the key metrics of success for driving towards resilience from a long-term perspective? And so this is very exciting, and there are a lot of researchers involved in this across 5 different organizations, both here and up to Maine and down into Connecticut. This is a whole New England-wide project. So we can hear about this going forward, but this is already engaging policymakers across all these different constituencies. And this is, of course, the work of Timmons Roberts, who I don't think is any stranger to this group. Timmons is a faculty member in IBIS who runs something called the Climate Social Science Network. And he works on unearthing the mechanisms and funding streams and channels through which mis and disinformation about climate change propagates. And so he releases reports on a dizzying basis. You can see the one that was just published looking at climate obstruction across Europe, and he's about to release one on the Coke-enabled infrastructure across this country. So if you're interested, you could sign up for their newsletter and follow their reports, but this is an amazing asset that we have here that is being leveraged towards climate action. And then something brand new that IBIS is really excited to lead, again, this is kind of a signature initiative, is something called Equitable Climate Futures. And it's a 3-year initiative to build capacity for climate solutions research with a strong focus on Providence and Rhode Island. And the only thing that qualifies you for funding under this umbrella is actually partnering with outside community partners or policy governmental partners, even the private sector, if they want to work on solutions with a group of faculty. And so that's going to be the qualifying factor, and that is going to drive impact on the ground while preparing groups to be more ready to apply for larger funding sources down the road, whether it's through the Inflation Reduction Act or resilience programs or other granting opportunities. So many communities just don't have the capacity to actually think about this, and this is directed funding that helps them get started. So we're really excited about this. There's a strong focus on under-resourced and historically marginalized groups as the frontline partners for this kind of initiative. Again, kind of leaning into the equitable word there. And there are 4 pillars. I'm not going to go into all of these, but we're particularly excited about the climate and health capacity that Brown can bring to bear with its School of Public Health and its medical school. And we have, I have a huge number of partners over there who are clapping and working together to try to think about Brown's leadership in this space. Because again, if you go back to my messaging, the public health is a huge threat, but it's also a huge opportunity to intervene in these outcomes that we now feel are inevitable, and to think about how we could begin to message the opportunities of transitioning away from fossil fuels as well. So this is really exciting. So if you know of partners that might be interested in engaging with us as this kicks off, that would be great. We have a proposal on the streets right now at Brown, and you can get up to $60,000 a year, which is actually quite a bit of money to work with an organization or community partner. So yeah, keep me posted. That would be super fun. All right, I'm going to transition to this kind of like framing thing. This is very loosey-goosey. I just put this together today. So maybe there's something here to discuss, maybe not, but it kind of brings a little bit more of my personal journey into it, I guess, for lack of a better word. Maybe there's something that resonates with some of you, or maybe you have your own organization inside your heads. But we are faced with, we've always been faced with this kind of dichotomy, and I get this all the time, right? From a gradient of kind of personal action on the one hand, all the way up to like, well, what we're really aiming for is like large scale policy, federal policy, international policy. But then there's the things we can control best, which are down here. And then there's the scales of impact, which are kind of over here. And so, I've kind of charged myself with thinking strategically about how do I navigate this dichotomy between the things I can control and the scales I'm trying to impact. And, how do I add this up? And so I started, back in the day, there's some other policy levers thrown in there. But, when I first started this journey back in January 1st of 2017, as it happens, I was interested in this space down here because it was the only thing I felt I could control, and I had no community to plug into, and it's just me and my little family and my little bike and whatever. And so, I was trying to keep my mental health in check at that point, and I was thinking that if there's a way I could just contribute en masse to the kind of market signals that I wanted to send, then that's good. So I just bought all the panels, and I did all the things and retrofitted my entire house and all this stuff, and mostly stopped flying. That's a whole nother thing. I could get into a whole wormhole about flying, but at any rate, I won't. And so this is kind of where it all started. But of course, now it's fairly more evolved in terms of my low carbon approach. But what that helped me see, I'm only bringing this in because I really think it's important to the rest of what I'm going to talk about, which is the cross scale work that I actually began to uncover through engagement down here, actually. And that's just where I started my journey. Some people are like more like, maybe they start up here. Okay, that's fine. I did not start there. But there's also, I started to see these ways in which all of these things I was doing down here, were starting to scale up. And that's what has been really exciting for me, because now I've capped out my kind of low carbon journey. Like now I have all these other things to tackle. But basically, the messaging box is extremely important to me at this point, and that's a case I made to you tonight about messaging opportunities and not just doom and gloom and things like that to the American public. That's a huge opportunity for us to work across scales, and that has ripple effects up and down. And then this is the ripple effects of market signals, the ripple effects of community building. And there's a lot of social science that's now going into this, that's talking about the cross-scale trickle up that happens when we get to work and when we talk about it, when we walk the walk on a personal level. The power of our networks, right, coming to life, and the science is becoming more and more clear. So I didn't know that at the time, but now I've become aware of a lot more literature there. And then what we're doing tonight, building community, thinking about how my engagement down here begat that through, for example, the bike community, which I found because I started biking, and then all of a sudden I'm in City Hall, and all of a sudden I'm thinking about state ordinances, and I'm fighting for this and that. And that's not something I could have seen getting on my bike on the first day, right? That's something that became apparent through the act of biking and almost getting killed in the mean streets of Atlanta for 3 years on a daily basis. So I'm just giving those examples as kind of one-offs, but as we think about this era, I am thinking very thoughtfully right now, and I don't have any answers, but I'm thinking very thoughtfully about how to rework this framework into a more strategic positioning, where some of this stuff at the federal level is just going to be a buttressing and defending kind of thing, right? So that's what's going to change, is a buttressing and defending, for we can preserve what we can at the federal level, and then what can be done here at this level that could become blueprints, templates, or areas of bright spots that wouldn't otherwise have been moving as far as fast had this not happened. So where is the opportunity to lean into that, even as we buttress very actively against the federal level? And I don't have any answers. I'm just sharing some stuff. I want to leave you with like a very cool thing that we're doing at Brown, and then I'll turn it over to questions here. This is something that I think represents a messaging win, and something I'm really excited about doing at Brown year in, year out now. It's something called the Carbon Reduction Challenge. and I run it as a project in my class in spring. And it's been taught, I've taught it at Georgia Tech for many, many years. And I just want to point out that the students have been, and this is a class that hasn't scaled to like 1,000 students. So this class was really like 30 students to 60 students to 90 students. Like it's not because the more students are in the class, they were achieving these wins, but the student teams are actually finding and identifying thousands of tons of CO2 as part of this class project and really going out and getting it never emitted, basically. These are projects that went to implementation. And so that's a very large number. I'll talk about how large that is in a second, but this is 100% student driven. They find their partner and they design and hopefully move a large scale emissions reduction project to implementation. And we're very successful because not only are we saving carbon, which is my goal, right? I achieve much more carbon savings here than I do on my bike in 500 lifetimes. We're saving money. We're saving the organizations money. They're building an entire business case, going back to the economic piece. They're building a full business case for their intervention, and they're doing the payback periods and ROI and net present value, all of that stuff. They're getting a sense that they can be agents for change at a large scale that actually matters in the tons of carbon space, or some cases, hundreds of tons of carbon from an individual project. And of course, you know, we're focusing more and more of our work on our campuses themselves. So we're helping our campuses along on their climate action goals and achieving some big wins along the way. Still haven't gotten a project approved at Brown yet, but we're still working on that. It's only the first year. So this is the first year at Brown. We had a pandemic kind of situation here. These are all the Georgia Tech wins that we've notched up. But these wins are basically the illustrating the partnerships that bring this to life. So we have, you know, Delta, a repeat customer of the Carbon Reduction Challenge, Home Depot, a repeat customer of the Carbon Reduction Challenge, and ... down the line when we have these institutional organizational relationships that we can lean on. And why do they keep coming back? Well, mostly because we save the money, but they're also recruiting, of course, across the student body, and they're also able to get some good press if they win. And I do take the students up to DC. So first, though, how much carbon is that? 20 million pounds of CO2, which is the upper limit on that graph. That was in tons, so I did a kind of switcheroo there, but this is the upper limit of what we've achieved in the class in a single cohort is equivalent to running 50 homes solar powered for 20 years. So that is a lot of carbon that these students are putting or avoiding. My favorite kind of carbon, the kind that never gets emitted. And this is me with the Brown cohort of winners, taking them down to DC. This is Sheldon Whitehouse, of course, just building the message down in DC that students want to be doing this work. They're there, they care. There's an economic opportunity to be had when we lean into some of these emission saving enterprises. And of course, we have bringing organizations with us down to DC as champions for this work as well. So I will leave it there and hopefully take some questions. This is my famous call to action or whatever. And I say that as a geoscientist because this is unfortunately very true. So you can find this deflating. I personally find it very motivating to think about what a moment to be alive. What a gift, right? So that's kind of how I take it, but take it however you want to. So thanks a lot. I hope we have a lot of time for discussion.
Well, we can't get on time. Let's do a few questions. Let's keep it to questions more than comments or ideas, and we can do those on one-on-one conversations. So, Trent.
Yeah, when you say resilience, you do include social resilience. Right?
Yeah, I mean, I think, social systems resilience, right? So the systems we depend on for
social and resilient people.
Yeah, I mean, I think when I typically think of, systems resilience or resilience that changes outcomes at a community scale is kind of my own scientific definition.
Research showed you can develop resilience in students through education, hope, trust, ethics, so forth. So I mean, that comes back to
education as my climate solution piece, right? Is thinking about education. I don't just mean climate education. I mean all education So to your point, but I failed to mention that you may or may not know, how many of you know that Rhode Island has a new state level commission on climate change impacts? Yes, it's super exciting. So Rhode Island doesn't have a climate resilience plan per se at the state level. And this is the
Chief Resilience Officer.
Yes, so we
Yeah.
just now have a chief resilience officer that's been appointed within the last year at the Rhode Island DEM. But this is a new effort, and I wanted to bring it to your attention here because as we think about where Rhode Island could be in 5 or 10 years, this kind of proto commission that's just been named, and we've only met twice, and yes, I'm on the commission. So I've never been drafted into state law before, and they didn't even ask me if I would like to be on the thing. They're just like, thou shalt show up for this law resolution 2.5.9.2. So I said yes. And then, what we're trying to do, and this is a 6-month commission, which is just like laughable, right?
Yeah.
6 months for the state resilience plan for Rhode Island for the next 50 plus years. So I said, can we have longer? And she said, oh, these things never end. It's like, okay, well, now that's a little much. Okay, we went from 6 months to forever. But I wanted to bring it to your attention because I don't think it's making a big splash and there's really nothing around it. And at our little hearings, we have nobody there. And it'd be great to have some people show up from the community and learn about what we're doing, ask good questions, prod away. And as commissioners, that's our job, right, to prod away. But I think this is a really important opportunity for this community to think about what it means to encompass climate action, to lean into that resilience work, which is so critically important for our state's future. So just wanted to flag that to your question about resilience, this opportunity that's going to be, I think, finite. I think it's not going to go on forever. It'll probably be a year or two in terms of what's developed. And the key piece is the funding here, right? Where he says, oh, we have to think this big because we have no money. That's the reverse. You need to think this big. And then you need to think about how you get the money or how you can plug in. So that kind of thinking is important. It's important for the climate literate community and the climate, engaged community to help the state understand that this is a non-negotiable issue for Rhode Island. We have to get this right. And if this is our only opportunity, then this is the moment.
Thanks for that.
Yeah. So if you Google Rhode Island Commission on Climate Change Impacts, you'll probably find it. I found it online, but I'm happy to connect you to the clerk who's running it. And maybe they could connect some announcements to
Right, yeah.
through the group.
Announcement, we'll put it out.
Yeah.
Yeah. Happy to show up there. Other questions? Sure.
Yeah, so one of the things we're trying to do is decide which bills and which things to focus on the most.
Right.
And you had a very basic chart there which said you're still working out.
No, personally. Yeah, let alone your group.
Trying to measure or weigh the feasibility of an action and its impact. And my concern after watching some things fall through last year is that things will get passed that are palatable to people and they can say they did something, but it won't really have much of an effect.
Yeah.
So I'm just wondering if you have any kind of thoughts on methodology for how to judge these bills. What's it actually going to do and what impact is it actually going to have?
Yeah, I mean, I think I think if you're speaking to the technical expertise side, or are you thinking about political stuff? Because I'm more on the technical side of, what it might do and the benefits it might deliver, less about how is it a worthwhile political battle? Will it succeed or not? Right.
Well, those two different.
That's what I'm saying.
The same thing.
Yeah. So on the first piece of, the potential.
The second piece that I'm more interested.
Okay.
We can sort of figure out, is this thing got any legs or not? But is it going to have an impact is more of a question that we want to know. Because if you can only pick, I mean, I'm sort of frustrated by it. Why can we only do 1 or 2 things a year? We're kind of in a crisis here. We want to do a lot of things, but the reality is we probably have to focus.
Right.
And so how do we do that strategically?
Well, I mean, I think, I go back to the kind of the messaging that I was sharing before, especially with the economic messaging that you were talking about earlier. I mean, whenever there's an opportunity to advance, a jobs or economically founded framework, it's going to go a lot further, faster. I do worry about the the justice and equity related work in this environment. And, whereas when I was at ECRI, all the state legislators that were there were saying, oh yeah, that's super important intersectional space. And that's where we're going to focus our efforts. And I'm not so sure that that is the case right now in the near term.
What do you say, environmental justice?
Yes, environmental justice and equity focused framings of climate action and even instruments, which, it remains to be seen. This is just me, kind of reading the room a little bit in the economic arguments. But when we can think about having the cross-sectional space that we can identify means to advance that work, when we have messaging around economic opportunities and the right people around the table, then we can go further faster. But I wish I had a better answer. I don't know that I do.
Let's go. You had a
Oh,
question?
yeah. I just had a quick follow-up on the commission you were talking about.
Yeah.
What were some of the like specific ideas that people are talking about
Yeah.
with resilience?
Yeah, so
Yeah, and concrete, yeah.
yeah, there seems to be a fairly myopic focus on flooding.
Okay,
In the
that's
state.
what I was gonna get.
Yeah,
okay, got it.
and there's just been so much work that's gone into that. And I don't, in terms of the effect of it, it's just an issue of funding. Like they have the framework and they have the partners and they have the projects identified too. They just need money to get things done. And they're working on that and trying to identify that. And they're trying to make that point to the leads of the commission who are state legislators. This is the barrier on the flooding front. But, I, for one, raised my hand and said, that's because the communities have been in your ear about flooding for the last 6-7 years. And that's why all of these things, 2017, 2018, 2019, all your history of flood mitigation efforts are community driven. But we're going to start hearing from communities about fires and heat waves and disease-borne outbreaks, right? Mosquito-borne outbreaks, and extreme rainfall and drought, right? And these are things that are kind of here, but they're going to get a lot worse. And so if we're having a state resilience planning effort that's responsive to community concerns of the last 10 years, that's leaving the science off the table and even some of the early signs that we're having in the headlines right now, even from our neighboring states right now in the last week. So that was duly noted. And then I met with the chief resilience officer for the state right after that meeting. She said, thank you for saying that, because I've been trying to make that message and it doesn't have a lot of, political will behind it at this point. But, if we can find a way to leverage this commission to think on that scale, it would be really important
It's
for the
also
state.
mainly adaptation and not mitigation of carbon.
This is all
All-
resilience.
all of that.
So this
Okay,
is,
got
but I did raise my hand and I said that there are important opportunities to advance resilience with an eye towards emissions reductions as well. And so, how, again, to my little cross-sectional space, can we lift up those opportunities? Because the state has a carbon reduction goal and the state is going to have a resilience plan.
Yep.
Where is the intersections and can we be very explicit
Yeah.
about the opportunities to advance both missions? So that also, I hope, landed.
Yeah.
But again, public comment and engagement in this will just reinforce and be helpful so that it doesn't become just a unfunded flood mitigation plan, which it needs to be doing a lot more work than that.
Thank you.
Justin?
Yeah, so thinking of messaging, like for years, I think we in climate world thought, okay, maybe the reason climate action isn't a big topic politically that moves a lot of voters is just hasn't become apparent enough yet. And, once
When it does.
once it gets, noticeably warmer and the storms get noticeably worse, then everyone will really, bite into the meat of the challenge. And here we just had a presidential election where there were literally major storms, in swing states during the final months of the campaign. And yet we still couldn't have it as a significant topic of public conversation because we were worried about fracking jobs in Pennsylvania or whatever the reasons were. And so it feels like either the messaging, isn't powerful enough to break through even in the face of disasters, or the messaging environment is so tilted against us, or just, do you have any theories on why it wasn't a topic in this year's campaign and how do we make it a topic?
Well, I think, I am very frustrated by what I consider to be a legacy messaging problem with the climate movement about our environment. And, this was an election that broke on the economy. And, climate change is an economic threat and it's an economic opportunity. And so.
Yeah, and not just disaster payments, but also like inflation, a lot of grocery prices are driven by, worldwide droughts and crop failures and
Yeah,
it's
and
getting worse.
migration as well. So the border was the other top
Exactly.
issue, and the border is a climate issue as well, right? We all know it in this room. But how can we begin to connect those dots, and how can we begin to surface those key talking points and help people understand that it's never been about polar bears. It's not about polar bears. It's not about the environment. And I don't know how long it's going to take, but until we can figure out as a community of messengers and people who care, then that's going to be a challenge. And I think those arguments are extremely readily made. And that security one I would lump in the same, right? That would have gone very far if we could have lifted up that messaging and made some key talking points around that. So I mean, I don't want to say that any of that would have changed any of this outcome. I think this is such I hope it's an aberration in our history. But I know that going forward at all scales, this is the kind of messaging that we're going to need to lean into more. And we have not done that. And I blame climate scientists as well, right?
It's not just polar bears, but we also talk, and I talk all the time about, transitioning away from fossil fuels, which some people read as a threat, either to their livelihood or to the gadgets that they like that go vroom vroom. And
they have to balance that out with the opportunity spaces and the threat spaces. That has to be a better calculus in people's heads. Is shifting away from fossil fuels is a moral issue. It's just not. It's a non-starter. It doesn't make any sense to most people. When it has fueled our growth historically and still employs, of course, quite a few people in critical political districts. But the jobs growth on the EVs, 180,000 jobs, in 2 years in this country. So, and that's like 30,000 full jobs or something like that in this country. So, where are those statistics, right? When they're just getting hammered away on EVs all the time. Just talking about where those manufacturing jobs are going, how many plants are breaking ground in conservative districts, where were those kind of talking points? I don't want to, get
Question in the
too
back.
much election, still
if you
really
don't-
coming.
Yeah.
Question. If you guys have thought about, instead of trying to mitigate or kind of utilize the floods with these things that are already happening and creating energy, is that a topic that is brought up?
Like creating, harnessing energy, like wave energy or water energy or something.
Yeah. Water, it's kind of like getting it to a certain point where it can create energy and replace like the coal plants that are already messing up the environment and connecting that to the grid.
Yeah.
Is that an idea that you guys have been-
Well, not me, guys. I think the question was about whether, I think in general about hydropower capacity, perhaps, but is that right? Fair?
Yeah, I'm just curious.
Yeah, so the large scale hydropower opportunities that we have in this country are fully utilized at this point. There's no other hydropower, large scale hydro facilities that we could be building. Now, there are companies that are pushing in through startups and things like that into technologies that could be deployed at a much smaller scale, to your question. So these would be like, stream scale kind of applications. So normally we dam a big river or something, and we let it all back up, and then we let it through in small streams, and it turns turbines, right? And that's how we have hydroelectric plants. But there are companies that are looking at harnessing much smaller levels of energy that might provide some modicum of resilience at the household level, for example. And that might be, another form of distributed energy. You can put solar panels on your roof. You can put a hydroelectric facility in a nearby waterway. I'm sure you need a lot of permits to do that. But there are companies actively working on that R&D. And so, the number of companies that are looking into various scales and forms of low carbon electricity right now are very many, but that's one of them.
And also there's tidal power.
Tidal power, of
Yeah.
course, has
Yeah.
been long deployed. It's over 70 years old in Europe. They have a huge tidal power facility in France that's still operational. And so there's wave energy, which is even cooler. They're doing that on the West Coast where they have more waves than we have over here. And they're looking at ways that devices could be installed, probably not even at the surface, but slightly below the surface to allow for shipping traffic. And through hydraulics, they capture the wave energy and they can be connected to a coastal line. So that's coming to a theater near you as well, I think.
Christopher, you want to ask our
I
last
was
question?
Actually gonna touch on that because
Yeah.
my day job is to analyze impacts of renewable energy and get renewable energy projects permitted. And so
Okay. Great.
tidal and current are very possible,
Yeah.
but there's a lot of messaging that has to get behind that because let's just say we wanted to put a big wave energy plant out off of Barrington Beach. It would not be popular.
Right. Yeah.
I'm just gonna say that.
Yeah.
Having lived there for 30 years.
Yeah. I mean,
But,
you can't even get an offshore turbine 9
But
miles
it's a
up there.
very viable way to generate electricity.
Very cool. So thanks so much for the question. Very creative thinking.
I don't know if you want to do more questions.
Peter Traffin.
Oh, Peter, yes. Want to come up, meet me up here?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Thanks very much. Kim, you've done a wonderful job showing us about opportunities. Really, we need to start finding ways to take advantage of them. The reason why I'm raising my hand is because we have a major deficit of education. And I don't mean at Brown or our
Even
other
at Brown.
colleges as much as in the K through 12 area.
Yeah.
There's
Yeah.
just isn't enough commitment at the level of the state government and the school boards to make sure that every Rhode Islander is aware of the things that we've been hearing about tonight and for the last 30 or 50 years, if you want to go back that far. So what can we do as a state to make sure that everybody knows what the issues are? Simple, huh?
Yeah. I mean, I think.
Can you repeat the question?
Yeah, the question was about education and specifically K through 12 education. What are the opportunities given that we're so far behind where we should be with K through 12 education?
Should I answer it?
Let's give the professor a
I'll
chance.
take a stab. I'll take a stab. I do have 4 kids in Barrington Public Schools after all, so
Yeah.
I'm acutely aware of what they do and what they don't do on this topic. It's precious little that they do at the even in the advanced classrooms in Barrington, Rhode Island, let alone my home districts in Atlanta, Georgia, where they had, basically surgically removed, climate change. And in some cases, my child's textbooks had climate denial talking points and the only coverage of climate change in their textbook in Atlanta, Georgia. So these textbooks were dated, of course, but that becomes a resourcing issue, and this just all snowballs in a way. But there's obviously political malfeasance there, and we can look at what's happening with K through 12 education now in Texas and Florida around, politicization of K through 12 education is super alarming. What can be done? I think that I sat on the Resilient Barrington Advisory Group with Kim, actually. And we were unified in pushing for engagement with our local public schools on climate. And we think about this not with respect to national science standards, which is one way to approach this, is to just make sure that those science standards are aligned and, large enough as a corpus of the curriculum to go forward. And there are national science standards now, and whoever is interested in working on that, that would be an amazing effort to try to get that better if you have inroads there. But even at the local level, they are so responsive to engagement at the local level, and we have superintendents and we have school boards. This is a climate fight that's worth having. Again, coming back to the K through 12 education as a lever for climate solutions, that's what I'm trying to infuse into the climate action plan for Barrington and the resilient Barrington plan, is deep engagement with the schools, right? So how are our students learning from solar panels that aren't there, would be my question, right?
Yeah.
This insanity, it's crazy, drives me nuts. So thinking about all of that, how can we be using our schools as resilient community centers more effectively, right? How could they be serving us in multiple strategies for the coming climate shocks? So these are all important questions. I don't really have a great answer to that super great question, other than to say that at the local level, we can really advance things that become templates that are replicable curriculum and frameworks for kids to engage in this space that other districts could adopt. So you can do it the hard way from scratch in your home districts, and then it could be ported to other places. So to be better connected across the state and beyond, so we could, accelerate and disseminate best practices and modules and things a lot better than we do as well. That's key to all of this too. To not reinvent wheels all the time when you don't have to.
There's a question from George online, please.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for hosting this amazing session. Regarding your climate carbon reduction challenge, do you think it could be applied outside of academia and towards cities, towns, really any group where those who help keep carbon from happening would be able to get rewarded? It seems to be a huge opportunity for like a gamification or that type of something similar to light it up out there and really get some real huge reductions at scale.
Yeah, so I mean, this goes into what I talk about in my class all the time, which is, the non-existent price on carbon in this country, and the fact that, we can do things out of our own goodwill, but we're not getting paid. Often we have to pay for the privilege to reduce less carbon. And so, when we think about the value proposition for my students, I have them benchmark their carbon reductions against a reasonable price on carbon, like $20 a ton would be laughable. And in the EU, it's, more, in California, it's more, but let's just say that that's the case. And they're like, oh my God, I'd be getting paid like millions of dollars,
Right.
And I'm like, yes, I want you to take that lesson, because you may be able to do this work in a jurisdiction where that actually is the case. And now you understand what a powerful framework that would be if we actually had a federal price on carbon. So I will say to you, sir, which I say to anybody, that Citizens Climate Lobby is an organization that has chapters all over the country. I'm sure they have one here in Rhode Island. Is anybody in CCL, affiliated with CCL? Okay, so they're arguing for a revenue neutral carbon fee and dividend program, where this may win the day even in this administration. You just never know. Jim Baker walked into Trump's office on one of his first days in office and said, this is the conservative way forward on climate change, sir. And why don't you be the guy, that gets it done? And of course that didn't go anywhere. But this is a market-based strategy, to your point of how we could begin to do this. Now, I think that we already have a carbon price in Rhode Island, because of course we're a part of the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, which is super great. But that's a floor for what we could be doing here in Rhode Island. And we could be designing our own kind of markets, if you will, that could be recognizing that a lot of people want to move these needles. So even I'm thinking about this with respect to Barrington, and now I'm like really out on a limb here, but there are a lot of people who would really like to see solar panels on the schools in Barrington.
Same.
That to your question, and how can we think about frameworks for people to be able to offset their flights instead of paying a third-party organization that's based down in Brazil, and you never know what the heck is happening with all of that. you know, maybe you want to offset in your local community. And is there a model that we might be able to get together in some communities? So I think that creative thoughts outside the box and acting locally and designing things locally could be really fun chapter to lean into in this kind of otherwise.
Yeah, thank you so much.
You. Well, I think we're at time,
Yeah.
but thank you so much for being here. Yeah, let's give a round of applause. Please sign our list on your way out. Yeah,
have you signed
and,
up?
we also post our events on Instagram and Blue Sky now, if, you're not into emails. December 11th on Zoom, we got the politics team. Yeah, we'll try to connect with the clerk so we can get people to this resilience committee meeting. That would be great. And then we'll be having a holiday event. We're also getting ready in case there's like an executive order against offshore wind or that sort of thing to mount up a protest here. So, it is a good reason to stay on our mailing list. And thank you all so much for taking the time out of your personal lives to be here, be with us, and listen to Professor Cobb and join our community. So thanks all. Hope to see you soon. Yeah, there's pizza, yeah.
If anybody wants a card, I have a bunch of cards. If you want to stay in touch or you can get your question or whatever.
Oh, yeah, I do.
I'm happy to get.
understand. I shouldn't couldn't talk about it.
Thanks, everybody on Zoom. Appreciate you being here. We're gonna sign off. See you next time.